Mr. Javed Ludin, thanks so much for giving us some time. Just
You're welcome.
looking at Pakistan and your statements that have, you could say, evolved over the years. There was a time when you criticized Pakistan for being the core issue of violence, of terrorism in Afghanistan. Has your view changed over time?
No, I mean, views of reality don't usually change if they're based on reality. You could have, as an Afghan, I suppose, I could have a different set of expectations from Pakistan, but I do continue to believe that Pakistan has, unfortunately, been the source of instability in Afghanistan. I think it's even more serious when you think about the fact that it's been really under control of Pakistan. It's really been a state policy, if you like, in Islamabad to provide sanctuary and protection and even facilitation to the very forces that have been killing Afghans over the years and have been creating instability in Afghanistan, preventing the country from achieving lasting peace, from achieving stability and prosperity. That
Has
the Afghan
anything
people,
changed in terms of the support and the succor that Islamabad or
I,
Rawalpindi gives?
I think because I'm no longer in the government, so I don't have access to the amount of information that compared to what I used to have. So I don't know what has really changed, but one thing certainly I'm seeing now, as opposed to when I was in the government, is the fact that there is a peace process that Pakistan ostensibly is facilitating the peace talks between the United States and the Taliban.
It's interesting because
Now,
when
this
you
is
were in
something
government and Dr. Ranveer Daftar Spanta was the NSA, it was you who were trying to get
Yeah,
Mullah Baradar
exactly,
free.
exactly. So that's what I was coming to, because at that time, we were seeking exactly the same thing that's happening right now, which was a process of direct talks with the Taliban between the Afghans and the Afghan government and the Taliban, facilitated. It was, I hope, by Pakistan, and they didn't. The Pakistani government was just not prepared, and that was the conclusion at the end of the assignment that I had from my own president at the time to reach out to Pakistan, and it involved a lot of traveling back and forth between Islamabad and Kabul. They would engage with us, and I think the reason they engaged was more just to show to the Americans and show to the rest of the world that they were engaging. But I reached a conclusion at the time that it was actually just a waste of time on our part and waste of expectations, because they wouldn't do the substantive thing. At one point, they asked me, that for me to say that Pakistan should facilitate the peace talks is just very general, that I have to have specific requests, so that Pakistan can think about whether they can deliver. And I said, and it was in the front in front of the American delegation as well. And I said, well, is releasing Mullah Baradar from prison a specific enough request? And the Americans, I think, nodded. They said this is specific. But then the Pakistanis didn't budge then either. It didn't work. The most we achieved at the time was a meeting with Mullah Baradar in prison, in the presence of Pakistan's security forces there. But Mullah Baradar at the time was not in a situation where he could say anything substantive.
Many say he was drugged at that point of time, possibly.
That was our perception, that I think he was probably
But in
just
terms of
sedated.
engagement with Pakistan, now that seems to have come full circle with the current government as well. Because President Ghani, when he first came to power, made his first visit to Rawalpindi, to the Chief of Army Staff. And now again, he, after making a lot of protests about Pakistani involvement in terror activities of some, or at least facilitation. He's again going to be meeting Imran Khan. So where is that going?
I mean, I suppose with Pakistan, any Afghan government is, I think, inescapably linked in a way that you cannot really forget a situation where Pakistan, the key to stability in your country really lies with another country and the support that they're providing to the enemies of the state. But then on the other hand, there's not much that we, under the prevailing circumstances, that we can do other than to try to engage them. Our hope, obviously, is that because, by definition, providing support in sanctuary to terrorism, to radical forces, whether they are against the Afghan state or whether against the Indian state or any other state, is bound to be a short-term policy because it's going to have a blowback effect, and it's going to come back in effect
Bite the hand that
Pakistan
feeds.
itself, the hand that feeds it. So you would imagine that at any given time, the Afghan government, or for that matter, any government, Indian government as well, would have a hope that some in the Pakistani establishment would realize that. And then you hope, you kind of really then are led by hope that maybe, therefore, it's time to engage them, and this time you will see the result. Unfortunately, time after time, this expectation has again been shunned and has not been materialized. But with with Imran Khan, we probably didn't try it as much as we tried it with Nawaz Sharif on the previous occasion, after we were completely, utterly disappointed with General Musharraf. So Prime Minister Sharif could not deliver it. Frankly, ask me, I don't think Imran Khan can deliver as well. But I think I can not pick too much of an argument with President Ghani. Especially, I mean, then we get into a little bit of domestic politics as well, because Ghani, whether or not he really genuinely believes that Imran Khan can deliver Taliban to peace talks is another matter. I think President Ghani has his own domestic issues as well, and that's probably why he is turning.
Even if you're an opponent of his policies, you still favor the institution of the state and legal
Very much.
parameters. So
much.
in that sense, with the Afghan government not being involved in talks with the Taliban so far, and doesn't seem to be moving any closer to that, what are your views on where talks with the Americans are?
I think it's unfortunate, regardless of whether I am in the government or out of the government, or whether I support a particular government or oppose a particular government in Kabul, is completely beside the point. As an Afghan and as somebody who has been an official of the Afghan state at one point, I think the real peace process can only happen when you have the Afghan state as an interlocutor, not only with Taliban but with others like the United States and Pakistan. However, sadly, in this particular process, that has not been the case. Now, of course, I think it would be amiss also to just criticize others for doing that intentionally. I think that this is where I have an issue with my own government, that if they have mismanaged the situation, it doesn't help to just blame others for it. I think that it could have been handled in a different way. The Afghan government would have been in a much better position, much stronger position, had they managed a domestic consensus, had they had the support of all the political forces there in the country. And in that case, I think Taliban would have had a hard time excluding the Afghan government. Pakistan would have had a hard time excluding the Afghan government, and the Americans would not even have done it. I don't think the Americans think it's in their interest to exclude the Afghan government. I think they're trying to include the Afghan government, but it's just that it's quite hard.
It's quite hard, but the other side of the coin is that Afghan political space is extremely divided and fractured, especially on this account. Everybody wants peace, but on how the government or intra-Afghan talks will take place, and many feel that it's actually individual interests that are prevailing over the country's interests here.
I think, I mean, the one thing you have to, as you said rightly, the one thing that has been perhaps the single unifying thing in the Afghan politics in the last 20 years at least has been the issue of peace, when there is no one that would really disagree with it. And that includes the question of how to bring peace. But I think the failure is really in the fact that when the Afghan government becomes a force for separation, a force for fragmentation, then I think then you're really in an unfortunate situation that building unity becomes, or building consensus becomes impossible, because that's what historically I think in Afghanistan at times of like this, governments have rallied others with them. President Karzai did that. I mean, on a number of occasions. On other things, perhaps he didn't so much. Although he was known as the great unifier or the great consensus builder, but perhaps on other things he didn't so much try as hard. But on the issue of peace, the very process for him involved, number one, building consensus within the country, making sure that everybody is part of this and everybody feels comfortable. And then number two was to try to speak to the Taliban. This government, on the other hand, has been trying to do the opposite. He's trying to do a deal on its own. He's had a very exclusionary view of the process because they're very, very insecure. They think if they open up the process, somebody else will take the credit. So I think they're putting a little bit of, they're having a very narrow-minded approach to peace, whereas the requirement is the opposite, that you have to broaden up, you have to really see the bigger picture and see the needs of the country. And then down the line, if some credit went to other people or you didn't take the entire credit, then that's fine.
But overall, do you see the process moving to the inevitable nature of the Taliban being involved in some manner, if not totally, in governance?
I suppose. It's quite hard at one level to really answer this question because we have not had a sort of a comprehensive introduction of a blueprint or of a political position from the Taliban. We don't exactly know what they want. They have said certain things, like that they don't want the American troops anymore there, and that they want an Islamic system. They haven't insisted on the Emirates issue. But we don't know what that really means. So I think that's why this political process, the peace talks, is very, very important, because it's not just about speaking to someone who has already a well laid out, well articulated position, and then you have to really argue with them. This could also be an opportunity to shape their own ideas. The Taliban should know that there are certain things that they may be a little behind the curve with.
Not behind the curve.
Completely behind the curve, and they probably don't have a good enough grasp of what has really changed in the Afghan society. And if they continue to think in old ways...
I met one of your prominent journalists who was in Doha for that 16-day talks, and he was telling us that some of the Taliban actually want to know what's happening in Kabul, what was it like.
I think it would be important that they find out. and then I think the only way they can remain relevant would be to try to try to go with the current and try to change, because I think the time really is of embracing change. We would be happy. I mean, if the Taliban chooses to, number one, renounce violence and accept a permanent ceasefire, and number two, that they accept that this process that has been built, this constitutional order that has been built over the last 17, 18 years, is something that Afghanistan has not had for a very long time, and that they should accept it. Whatever ideas that they have that are already not parts of the system, although saying just having an Islamic system is not enough, because I think the Afghan constitution is Islamic enough. But if they have any specific ideas, that there is a constitutional process for that. The constitution can be amended by general agreement. So that's how they should do it. We have had, unfortunately, in the last century or so, we have had too many abolitionist movements. We've had too many times the Afghan state completely uprooted and destroyed. Once again, even the prospect of that is enough to really scare Afghans to their roots. We will not be prepared to entertain that. In the Taliban, it would be advisable, and I think anybody who has any influence over them, I would here, I think, go back to your question about Pakistan. I think, I think not only Pakistan, but any country in this region that thinks, and there are now a lot of them that speak to the Taliban, that they should see this as an opportunity to try to influence things in the positive direction, shape things, because any return in force of a Taliban the way we knew it, the so-called Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, that will not only be devastating for Afghanistan, it will not only be a huge loss for Afghanistan, it will be extremely dangerous for the region, including for Pakistan, because Pakistan now, completely separate from the Afghan radical movement, Pakistan itself has huge problem of radicalization. So it's only a matter of time before that can then be sort of blown out into something within Pakistan. And a Taliban Islamic Emirate just next door would be really the environment that it needs.
You were talking about other countries, other players who could possibly shape or influence the Taliban. Where do you see India's role? Because this embracing change that you were talking about, of still being relevant, we were there as observers, as unofficial observers, even though there were two former ambassadors to Pakistan and Afghanistan who was in Moscow. But how should there be more active engagement of India with the Taliban? Is that in India's interest?
I mean, I will always see a huge value in Indian involvement in any process. I mean, India has been a force for good. India has a democracy in this, the largest democracy in the world, but also pretty much the only democracy, meaningful democracy in this part of the world, is a country that we look up to. So we will feel comfortable, and we are aware of the geopolitical complexities. I think if we need Pakistan's cooperation, we will have to reassure them that this is not going to be at their cost. Nonetheless, I also feel very uneasy about India being on the sidelines. I think I've communicated my views very openly on this question to the United States government, to our own government, and to other parties that are involved in this, that we must, that even if India chooses to, for whatever reason, to stay out of this process, that we will be much more comfortable if India is much more engaged. And I think That would, again, India is also, as I said, if you look at it from a completely different perspective as well, not only is this a question of the future of Afghanistan, that's there, but tackling radical movements, extremist movements, and terrorism, Islamic terrorism, that's been really brewing in this part of the world for quite a few decades, is a regional issue. I think that's why Russia, you mentioned, China, India, Iran, Pakistan, the Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates,
possibly at some point of time Germany again.
And then you get into beyond the region. You get into Europe, and then even America. They all are in it, not only because it is because they're seeking to secure Afghanistan's future. They're also in it because they see that this is going to have a huge implication for their security. So I think that's yet another argument for why India has to be at the table and play its role.
You're a senior advisor to one of the big tickets for the presidential elections, which are now slated for September 28th. Hopefully they will take place there. Haneef Atmar is known to be a very canny politician. You're talking about President Karzai and his inclusiveness. If you look at the ticket, he's got Yusuf Qanuni, he's got the Panshiris and the Tajiks there, he's got Mohammad Mohakek and the Hazaras, and I believe a third unofficial candidate is also Uzbek. So he's been very inclusive, but in terms of getting the votes. But how do you see the process moving forward? Does he really have a chance under the current administration, because they are, of course, the first movers?
Yes, well, the Afghan election is moving forward. Unfortunately, it has had a couple of setbacks. It's been delayed already twice. And I think, sadly, one of my very serious criticisms of the current government is their failure to live up to its number one commitment to the Afghan people, and that was electoral reform, and a commitment to hold the elections in an accountable, transparent, and fair manner. And as a result, what we have is a process where confidence is extremely low. I mean, whether you go by the state of affairs right now, the commission, the process that they are proposing to take forward, Supreme Court issues, whether they will use biometrics or whether they will not, this one, or even if you go by the most recent example of the election that was held, the election for parliament, it was a debacle, I think, frankly. And this government has to be taken accountable, because I think it's not the fact that the election has been delayed already and it's mired into tremendous challenges is not a question of force majeure. It's not that we suddenly, everything was good and we suddenly run into some issue that was beyond the control of the Afghan government. In fact, I believe the current government had 4.5 years of getting this right, and they didn't. So now it's, rather than being held accountable, they are basically just treating themselves to another few months in power. They're basically extending their own power as if it's a reward for them rather than the punishment that they deserve. So the process is in a huge challenge. Having said that, we're encouraged that it's still, despite the current government's tendency to control things, to try to stifle political rivalry, there is a healthy competition there. Haneef Atmar is a patriot. I've known him for over 25 years, almost 30 years, and I've always been in awe of his commitment to our motherland, to our country. He has given sacrifices in very meaningful ways to this country. He has lost a leg in defense of this country. This cannot be said for many people who have actually taken a personal risk and paid a personal price. And therefore, I think if anybody deserves a chance, then he does. And he has, as you said, the other strength of his campaign is that he knows what the need of the day is. And I should have said this earlier, but whether it's the peace process, whether it's the security situation that we have with the Taliban, whether it's generally the way things are in Afghanistan and the regional, the single most important thing that Afghanistan right now needs is unity. If we have unity within, then the other challenges will be achievable. We will be able to prevail. And I think he realizes that. That's why he's brought everyone together. And he's also, I mean, he's the new generation, if you like. I mean, it can't be. He is somebody who was sort of born with this the problems of Afghanistan, if you like, and has felt it throughout his life. He's a product of that, and now he's coming up with a solution, with how to transform that. I think people of the older generation, whether they are people like President Ghani himself, who spent his time away from the country, or whether they were people within the country, they probably don't feel the needs of the country the way that people like the generation of Haneef Atmar does, because he kind of feels it in his heart, in his flesh. So all my, I mean, I have the honor of being one of his campaign advisors. But if we can get the elections sorted, the challenges that are there, then I think he has a great chance of winning.
On a more personal note, you have 4 daughters, is that correct?
Yes.
And I'm curious, is there any India connect there? Their names?
Yeah, my youngest daughter, who's in Delhi right now, his name is called India. Yeah, so but it's so many connections. I mean, I'm a Ludin, and I sort of really take, even though it's a Pashtun dynasty, but I take huge pride that I share a huge Indian heritage there with the Ludi dynasty here, so it's that. My wife also is a good percentage of her own genealogy comes from India. Her grandfather on the mother's side was from Kashmir.
Okay.
And then the other India that we had in Afghanistan was the daughter of our king, who's a role model of mine, King Amanullah, who he called his daughter India. So yeah, that's why she's called. But then there are 3 others, so I shouldn't just be focusing on one of them, otherwise I'll be very unfair. I have 4 of them.
Mr. Ludin, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Well, lovely to talk to you.